The first poem is called Reading Time, 1 minute 26 seconds. The fear of poetry is the fear, mystery and fury of a midnight street of windows, whose low voluptuous voice issues, and after that there is no peace. That round waiting moment in the theatre, curtain rises, dies into the ceiling, and here is played the scene with a mother bandaging a revealed son's head. The bandage is torn off, curtain goes down, and here's the moment of proof. That climax when the brain acknowledges the world. All value is extended into the blood awake, moment of proof. And as they say Brancusi did, building his bird to extend through soaring air, as Kafka planned stories that draw to eternity through time extended, and the climax strikes. Love touches so, that months after the look of, blue stare of love, the footbeat on the heart is translated into the pure cry of birds following air cries, or poems, the new scene, moment of proof, that strikes long after act. They fear it. They turn away, hand up, palm out, fending off, moment of proof, the straight look, poem, the prolonged wound consciousness after the bullet's shot, the prolonged love after the look is dead, the yellow joy after the song of the sun, aftermath, proof, extended radiance.
Hi, I'm Erin Mori, and thank you for joining us here in the beautiful Woodbury Poetry Room. Thanks to the Woodbury Poetry Room and to Christina and Mary for inviting me and bringing me back to this room where I started writing this book. And to me, to be back in this room is a return to a beautiful site whose architecture is synesthetic. It's an architecture that listens, and it teaches us to listen. It brings the outside in, both that outside and the outside of books, because when we read, we bring the outside into ourselves. And this bringing inside is not an anthropophagy, a consumption or cannibalism of something of the book. It's not a colonization of other people's works or an appropriation. It's a cohabitation. In April 2017, 7 years ago, I cohabited in this room with the voices of poets. And one of the poets I listened to was Muriel Rukeyser. And I'm back to talk about Muriel Rukeyser today. It was in listening to her voice, as I said, that I began this book, Theophylline, a poetic migration or an apoetic migration via the modernisms of Rukeyser, Bishop, and Grimke, with little call-outs to De Castro and Vallejo. They wouldn't put the whole title on the front of the book, but they got lots of it on there. And Theophylline is written in, there's 3 sections, one for each of the poets that I talk about, and there's a section of my own poetry that is stolen by an interlocutor who's a kind of resistant figure in many of my texts, Elisa Sampedrin. She puts her name on my poems. The book starts with a short introduction that kind of sets the scene, and I am going to start with that too. Inhale, écoute, time's threshold. To the Woodbury Poetry Room and its archives of voices, I came as foreigner and translator of poetry to think on beauty and space, for the room is beautiful, and the ache of migration, wanting to attend to 3 things: the process of hearing a voice, the place where the voice is heard, and the impulse to make a poem instead of something else. 17th April 2017, Cambridge, Massachusetts. A silence now audible In the noise of no noise, the test pattern static noise at the inside of the head. And in the chest, the sound of breathing. Rails, we called them. Rails in the chest. Their stutter audible in the breath. Ronchi. We are organisms in which breathing space and breathing time are not guaranteed. Asthma names me, has always named me. I am small and in bed, and I can only breathe with great wheezing difficulty. Pillows prop me, and I am wearing pajamas. It is 1959 or 1960, and asthma medications are not yet very good. Wood and light. The first poetry I know is Mother Goose and A. A. Milne's When We Were Very Young, and Now We Are Six. Like Christopher Robin, I too have sneezels and weasels, but I am never better the next day. Coughing and not coughing, light and a tree outside, not a tree, a bush, a lilac bush. Wheeze. Pediatrician Dr. Alan Cody comes from his home or his offices in the Greyhound building to Altadore to give me injections, and for a few hours after these home visits, breathing is eased, and I can let myself be carried away by the sound of voices outside or elsewhere in the house. Listening. The patter of voices elsewhere in the house. In the room, the three women American modernist poets whose works and voices I have chosen to open myself to all have in some way a relation to elsewheres, thus translation. An elsewhere of nearly forbidden light. To expose my being to their voices in the wood and light of the room. We say we are hearing a voice, but is it not the breath making this voice? And who can breathe? Who speak? Who listen? I breathe and listen. And with what text or articulation will I respond? So over 9 days in the room, I tried to discern the forms, what still, grasp the contrasting shapes, what moves. In the poetry of Muriel Rukeyser, Elizabeth Bishop, and Angelina Weld Grimke. In the United States of America in 2017, at Harvard in the Woodbury Poetry Room, I arrive across a border to apprehend an American poetry of the 20th century, as a translator might approach works in another tongue. To intend English from a foreign English and a foreign time, because it's the 21st century now. To attune to a minor language, Kafka, Deleuze, to listen, breathe. Then I didn't write anything new in poetry for over 3 years. I begin much later in fits and starts, stutters in the confinement of the pandemic. The public gone, and Elisa Sampedrin excising my poems and inserting hers. Interferes again in my work, completely ignoring what I'm desiring. But what am I desiring? Can a poem like silence listen? Can breath listen? Then there's an insertion from Elisa Sampedrin, who writes a poem here. It's called Something Else. You could see her resistance to the text here because she's not writing. When I'm thinking of why write a poem instead of something else, Elisa Sampedrin just gets to the point and writes something else. Whose muse was lost, jostled cause, but cause nonetheless? As when the bright square on the opposite wall is light's shadow, as if shadow and reflection were synonymous. Herself marauder too, though peaceable, never holds ever verily. Orphan is child yet of Orpheus, they of song. A dissolve and flutter. Since my mother died over 17 years ago, I've had difficulty writing poetry. You'd never know it. I still live in and love poetry, yet her death leaves a scab on poetry's tempest. No new skin emerges, the scab mercifully stays. Instead, poets keep me alive in their poems as I translate and live with their words in my mouth. The light square on the wall opposite is really, truly light's shadow. Elisa Sampedrin interferes. Thanks to my brother, I take self-defense, learn how to repel multiple attackers. I paste a young dad over a still of Giorgio Agamben. So wrong about the pandemic. From Pasolini's 1964 biblical epic, Il Vangelo secondo Matteo. It's timestamp visible so any reader of The Elements, my previous book, can gaze at the young philosopher on YouTube. Then to America I go, for America harbors my translations when Canada will not. International poetry ineligible for funding is almost entirely ignored by Canadian publishers. I ache to read sounds, to let voices inhabit me. Translating Rosalia de Castro, the early Galician modernist we never had in English, has altered my ear's capacities. I want to translate American modernism in these ears by fiercely vibrating in the swell of their syllables. Through their words and voices, I find poetry, not as my poetry, but as poetry's corollary, her listener. Wherever I go, I want to listen to women's voices. They charm the animals and make the trees dance. King of Thrace and Calliope, you could have had no better children than Muriel, Elizabeth, Angelina. O Orfea, Orfeu, Orfa eu, perdida son eu, os meus eus en ti. So that's the introduction that brings us right back here from this book into the room in which I'm standing right now, and which you can visit and have similar or different experiences. The next chapter here that I'll read from, of course, is the chapter on Muriel Rukeyser. And I wanted to say to begin with that my first encounter with Rukeyser was a while ago, in 1969. And that would have been when I was in high school. I read one of her poems in a section on the poetry of protest in our high school poetry anthology. It was a Canadian anthology called Impact. And there's probably no copies of that book left anywhere in the world except the one that I placed in the Canada Archives, Canadian Archives in Ottawa, in my literary archive. Maybe you can go there someday and read this incredible book of poetry that I had in high school. I don't remember the poem, but I remember it had long lines, and I remember her name under it in italics. And what Rukeyser meant to me then was that a poet can resist, can stand up, and can protest, can resist things that are wrong, that poetry could be a force for better. And in the 70s, Rukeyser was a very important poet in second line or second generation feminism, the rise of that in the 70s. And her voice was often present among women, and she was very much alive in my life in that way. And then I kind of went over from modernism to writing more experimental poetry myself, and I never went back to Rukeyser for 40 years until I came back to the poetry room with my ears attuned by Rosalia de Castro and wanting to read modernism by women again. So this is what I found in working on Muriel Rukeyser, who was born in Bronx, New York City in 1913 and died on the Upper East Side of New York City in 1980. There's a ghostly poem of hers, an excerpt on the cover page here, saying, it's from a poem called Then. When I am dead, even then I am still listening to you. I will still be making poems for you out of silence. Silence will be falling into that silence. It is building music. The section starts with another quote from Rukeyser. Do I move towards form? Do I use all my fear? Muriel Rukeyser's immigrations or migrations take her incessantly outward and back to zones of resistance to capital and returning to the soil of capital's most iconic formulation, America. Reporter, documentarist, seeker of justice, she brings back the news via a rhythmic poetic in which phrase and sentence cohere, yet punctuation and spacing defy coherence in order to extend it. Her poetry calls forth. It is a rhetoric, unflinching. In 1932, 19-year-old Rukeyser attends the Scottsboro trials as a Vassar journalist and gets typhoid fever when briefly jailed for fraternizing with African Americans. She writes later of black miners driven to silicosis, working unprotected on the Hawks Nest Tunnel in West Virginia, is in Spain at the outbreak of civil war in 1936 as a sports journalist. Witness to the community anarchism, self-help and fraternity, not chaos, of Barcelona. Refuses to pay taxes in 1968 to reject U.S. involvement in Vietnam, is in Hanoi in 1972 during the endless Vietnam War to protest U.S. bombings, returns to lie down in protest on the Senate floor in Washington, and is arrested peacefully. In South Korea in 1974, as head of PEN America, she keeps vigil for days at the gates of the prison holding Kim Chi-ha, sentenced to death for the crime of poetry, to demand his release. In 1978, one of her last poetry readings, a mini-stroke, topples her, and she reads from the floor in a tangle of mics and wires, refusing the ambulance. Her home is America, site of justice and compassion. If its government and courts serve injustice, Rukeyser raises voice and body in revolt. Her sexuality is enacted, not declared. She loves women and raises her son on her own. Her longest relationship is her last with her agent, Monica McCall, 24 years her senior, who outlived her by 2 years. Elisa Sampedrin has inserted another poem at this point, Mellifluous. What then is mellifluous, that honeyed voice or flow, Calliope's inner membrane I was born from, Orphic? Darkness, thrashing in the woods at night. It's just the dog. Someone threw him a shoe. Hey, that's my shoe. Organism, crossed out. Cockroach, crossed out. Poem. Child of my mother, I might have been American if not for the Immigration Act 1924 that forbid her family's return in 1929 to Cleveland's mills from the Ukrainian fields and hills where they'd gone back in 1921 at war's end due to the illness of my grandma's father. America, why did you not want us back? Rukeyser, listening to her Bronx accent, they say. Laconic but insistent, her voice. In my 1960s awakening as a child in Calgary, a city then 10% American, during the struggles against U.S. colonial wars on communism, few poets exemplify protest better than Muriel Rukeyser. She is for me the inheritor of the Wilfred Owen I'd read in school, of Robinson Jeffers and his shine perishing republic. To her I looked, to a woman poet who does not address her readers as boys, as did Jeffers, shutting me out. Hers is another address, to quote, what if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open. It's from Kathy Kolowitz in The Speed of Darkness, 1968. The complexity of witnessing is her solidity. But through what eyes does she witness? Who reads and why? The clamor of her forms that wrestle as they display the perils of sincerity. What does anyone see? Our own framework blinds us. Thrashing in the woods at night. A shoe? Rukeyser's is a voracious and loquacious line, many lines, many poems, 515 published to my count. She trusts something called experience. Poetry, Rukeyser says, is making something out of experience and giving it out to someone. This experience is one's own and not all of experience. It struggles with and against the experience of the other. And when she must, she does say she's a tourist. She has to come home and give it out to someone, not just give it to someone. The latter implies a one-to-one personal relationship, but the former, giving it out, implies people are a crowd. And though you claim you share with them and they share with you, in fact, you don't know what or if they are ready to receive. This is the poetry of witness, wherein who positions who? Who is silenced? Who is silent? She expends her energy, gives it out. Even when arrested at Scottsboro, stopped by the police, Washington, standing at the prison gates, Seoul, she breathes freely. This free breath does not always grant her voice. In her last 15 years, often in stroke recovery, her giving out is a code of pauses, where silences are part of the sound. She battles aphasia, recognizes the gravity in grave and the art in artifact. Speak to you then? To Louis Untermeyer in 1940, she declares, and I quote, "I believe in poetry. I believe that the life of people and the life of poetry must ultimately mean the same thing. I believe in the life of the spirit generally walking the earth, against war, against slavery, for the giving of all the processes and art and technique of living." That Rukeyser is white is crucial to the success of her enterprise. In her era, the experience, giving it out, of a non-racialized person automatically has perceived value. In such a paradigm, white person is taken as speaking on behalf of and to all. Compassion semi-automatically accrues to her. Insight accrues to her. She never has to struggle to speak in her own voice, to give out what is perceived as plurality's truth. Even though a woman, a lover of women, a Jew, a single mother are conditions encumbered by prejudice and misogyny in America, Rukeyser can assume the rostrum. Wind in her hair. She steps off the plane in Barcelona, in Hanoi. She clears her throat and looks outward. Her voice is certain, sure, her face heart-shaped. Falling just short of the evangelical, an American harbor, her documentary voice is clamor yet insists on clarity. Her audience is out there or here, listening. Is listening witness? Is the emotion of poetry plural, or is it just in me? Why do I see whiteness in witness? Ours voice is like oratory. What is oratory? Speech that frames us so we can make ourselves heard. Speech intended for witnesses. The witnessing of speech, but who witnesses what? Who witnesses this speech of the poet? I think here of conditions of reception. Rukeyser does know that these exist. She faces up to Senator McCarthy and his anti-communist inquisitors. She insists the reader is essential to the poem. Yet she is more passionately involved in production. Giving it out is a loquacity. The giving is to her crucial for the reception, but herein lies an illusion about reception never fully examined. Though she believes the poem exists because a reception is possible via readers or listeners, to my knowledge, she never questions publicly who and how the listener is able or not to receive her words. Her listener is assumed to be like her in class, race, and condition of hunger. I wonder, who is receiving? Who listens? Her work testifies to social responsibility, an enduring part of Judaic tradition. For Rukeyser, life is a gift, meant to be inhabited and enacted consciously every moment. in a response to the world and to others. And this responsiveness is a praise. To make the broken world less broken. Rukeyser nurtures justice and the virtues in her own socius, America. In a way, she addresses not these readers or these listeners. She addresses America. Who can speak or not speak is unexamined, elided, as it is by and large in later poetry called of witness. R does not witness, she rhetoricizes. At least she seems to take on and acknowledge this role of rhetoric that speaks on behalf of all, even if it rests mostly unexamined. Like Whitman, who drew his rhythms from his body and the sea, she articulates the relation of our breathing to our heartbeat. But what is this America? Whose is? Who breathes?
Bubble of air. The bubbles in the blood sprang free, crying from roots, from Darwin's beard. The angel of the century stood on the night and would be heard. Turned to my dream of tears and sang, Woman, American, and Jew, 3 guardians watch over you. 3 lions of heritage resist the evil of your age. Life, freedom, and memory. And all the dreams cried from the camps, and all the steel of torture rang. The angel of the century stood on the night and cried the great notes, give, create, and fight. While war runs through your veins, while life, a bubble of air, stands in your throat, answer the silence of the weak, speak.
It's Rukeyser on breathing and air and speaking. She herself didn't always have an easy time speaking. There's a poem in here, a page that is a bit of a transcript from a TV show, Rukeyser on TV. There is also this struggle. It's from Camera 3 in 1965 with James Dickey, poets James Dickey, Peter Varick, and host James McAndrew. Peter Varick interrupts Muriel Rukeyser constantly at volume, a logorrhea, and he squirms endlessly in his chair, taking up not only oral space but physical space on the screen, making it hard to grasp what Muriel Rukeyser is trying to say. M.R. says the general nervousness about poetry. M.R. says the desire for love, the desire for form. M.R. says of poetry, an effort at speech. The 3 men talk over her and she has a hard time getting a word in edgewise. M.R. at 16 minutes into the conversation. I am impossible. I cannot exist. Women poets can't exist. M.R. at about 3 minutes later, when asked to read, reads part 12 of The Outer Banks. The edge of experience, women, ships, lost voices. Her determination to recuperate histories of the marginalized that would otherwise be lost. She is the excessive ancestor of Adrienne Rich, wrote Eileen Myles in 1997 in The Nation, reviewing the reissue of Rukeyser's 1949 book, The Life of Poetry. To quote Myles, the book is chock full of radiant abstractions. I am unsure if this is a compliment. The emotional charge of the poem is what Rukeyser lays claim to. I turn back to the poems. Letter to the Front invokes her sense of responsibility, potent in the long shadow cast by the wars of the 20th century. To be a Jew in the 20th century is to be offered a gift. The poem says, if you refuse wishing to be invisible, you choose death of the spirit, the stone insanity. Accepting, take full life, full agonies, your evening deep in the labyrinthine blood of those who resist, fail, resist. She arrives at last at the women. Surely it is time for the true grace of women emerging in their lives' colors from the rooms, from the harvests, from the delicate prisons to speak their promises. Finally, when the poem ends, the I begins, giving it out. I now send you for a beginning, praise. I'm going to end my voice with a poem of Muriel Rukeyser's called Flying to Hanoi. Unfortunately, Elisa Sampedrin got at it in the book here and crossed out most of the lines. I'm going to read the whole poem regardless. Sampedrin just left the last line. I'll read you all of the lines. I thought I was going to the poets, but I am going to the children. I thought I was going to the children, but I'm going to the women. I thought I was going to the women, but I'm going to the fighters. I thought I was going to the fighters, but I'm going to the men and women who are inventing peace. I thought I was going to the inventors of peace, but I am going to the poets. My life is flying to your life.
Number 10. Surely it is time for the true grace of women emerging in their lives' colors, from the rooms, from the harvest, from the delicate prisons to speak their promises. The spirit's dreaming delight and the fluid senses' involvement in the world. Surely the day's beginning in midnight, in time of war, flickers upon the wind. Oh, on the wasted midnight of our pain, remember the wasted ones, lost as surely as soldiers surrendered to the barbarians, gone down under centuries of the starved spirit, in desperate mortal midnight, with the pure throats and cries of blessing, the clearest fountains of mercy and continual love. These years no separation. Oh, the future shining in far countries, or suddenly at home, in a look, in a season, in music freeing a new myth among the male steeped landscapes, the familiar cliffs, trees, towers that stand and assert the earth, saying, come here, come to me, here are your children. Not as traditional man, but love's great insight. Your children and your song, coming close to the source of belief, these have created resistance, the flowering fire of memory, given the bread and the dance and the breathing midnight. Nothing has been begun. No peace, no word of marvelous possible hillside. The warm lips of the living who fought for the Spirit's grace among despair. Beginning with signs of belief, offered in time of war, as I now send you for a beginning praise.